Welcome to Ladies Who Jazz, where each month I interview and feature a different female jazz musician. Today we are in Berkeley, California, and we have here the incredible Mimi Fox, who plays guitar. Mimi, thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here with you, Lisa.
Thank you, thank you. Can you please tell us how you got started playing jazz?
Well, it was a process for me because I started drums when I was 9 and guitar when I was 10. And so I was playing along to all my dad's old jazz records. He had a lot of great recordings, and I would take my mom's soup pots and bang on them. And finally she got me a little snare drum. And then when I was 10, I was into all the music. I was into the Monkees personally. I'm not ashamed to say it because I was only 10. And actually they had some good songwriters. So, Carole King and Jerry Goff. Anyway, so I was into them, and then my brother and sister got me into the Beatles. And I had an older cousin that played, and he taught me, basically my first few chords, and then from there I fell in love with the instrument. But I didn't actually start studying jazz guitar until I was about 24 when I moved to California. So it took me a while because I did play drums in high school, junior high and high school jazz bands, but I was playing more pop, funk, folk, different styles on guitar and then I studied classical guitar actually back east, and then finally got into jazz when I moved out here. So it was a process.
Speaking of which, you're originally from New York. What was kind of the impetus to move out to the West Coast? And what differences do you see in the jazz scenes between the East Coast versus West Coast?
Well, at the time that I moved out here, which was 1980, San Francisco actually had a thriving jazz scene. There was the old Keystone Corner. There was a lot of really cool stuff going on. Also, I was very fortunate to have as a friend and, first a mentor, then a friend, Bruce Foreman, the great bebop player. And Bruce was out here, and it sort of took me under his wing. And so that was a really great experience. To be quite frank with you, I had grown up in New York, and just felt like it was time for me to leave and to move on. And I had friends in L.A., and I did spend some time in L.A. I was doing a lot of studio work, but I didn't feel like it was really for me to have producers barking at me, telling me what style they wanted me to replicate. It wasn't very creative, even though I could see that it could be a good living. It wasn't for me. So I had friends in San Francisco, and then I moved up here, and I fell in love with the Bay Area. It was just, it's a great place. It's a vibrant, diverse community, and that was important to me too.
What do you think is happening in jazz right now that particularly excites you?
Well, when I travel, I'm very fortunate, Lisa, to do a lot of traveling all over the world, and I see so many great young players, particularly a lot of great young women players, and that's just really exciting. I always tell people when they ask me, what's it like being a woman in jazz, as if I would know anything different, because I haven't been a penguin in jazz, say, or a man in jazz. But in any event, I always say that I'm not a sociologist, and that being said, I certainly have seen changes in the jazz world, but in many other fields, it takes a long time to make changes. But there have always been, a lot of great women players, and now I see more and more young women players coming up that are really tremendous, all instruments. And so, I could be in Tokyo and be out at a jam session after a concert that I've given and see a great young trumpet player, piano player, vocalist, and it's just very exciting.
Who are your top 3 jazz influences?
Oh boy, let's see. I would have to say Coltrane. That was one of the first jazz albums that really, and it was funny because Coltrane is known for doing some very out and very adventurous and daring work, but also to me his ballad playing was just so gorgeous. And I remember when I first heard Naima, I just started crying. I've had their old LP, and I just kept playing it over and over again until I actually wore out the groove. I had to get another recording. So I would have to say Coltrane. Probably for solo guitar, Joe Pass was a big influence for me, and I do a lot of solo playing, and probably Elvin Jones, because I think I do still play drums, although not professionally, because it's you can't play 2 instruments really well. It's just too hard. They're too demanding. But I still have a set in my garage that I kick around on, and I think having that rhythmic background has really given me a certain confidence as a musician.
Speaking of Joe Pass, can you talk a little bit about your time working with him as your mentor? And was there anything specific that you learned from him that unlocked something in your playing?
Well, one of the biggest things that happens when you have an opportunity to study with someone who you've admired so much is that it really boosts your confidence. When I went to see Joe, I think I was about 33 or 34, but I had already been practicing, for many, many years, many, many hours every day, on top of teaching, on top of gigs, on top of touring, just very devoted, obviously. And when I went to see Joe, first of all, I had to sort of fight with him. He was a little gruff at first. I met him backstage at a beautiful concert hall in San Francisco where he was playing with Joe Williams, and I went backstage. I just had a friend that was practically kicking me. She said, "This is your opportunity to go say hi and just introduce yourself." So I did that and was stumbling over my words. And I said, I play some solo guitar. Would love to study with you. I've studied some with Bruce Forman. And he goes, "Well, if you're studying with Bruce, I don't know what you need me for." And I said, I really want to work on my solo stuff. And Bruce doesn't really do that. And, I've transcribed a lot of your solos note for note. So I had to sort of beg with him. He said, "All right." He said, "Meet me tomorrow at my hotel at 10 o'clock sharp." So I got there at his hotel, and I came in, and he goes, "Sit down." And it was almost like a sort of an FBI interrogation. He was like, "Sit down, play something." And he's got his robe on, and is already smoking a cigar. I had a nice silk blouse on. I was all dressed up, and felt like I was looking good. I immediately started sweating like a pig. I think I big things coming down from my arm because I just was nervous. I'm not someone that sweats a lot, but I was nervous, and I was hoping that we'd get to play a blues together or something to warm up, but no, he was like, "Play something." So I played one solo piece, play something else. I played like 6 or 7 numbers. He kept barking at me to play something. Then finally he puts his cigar out, thank God, because I was dying of smoke inhalation, puts his cigar out in the ashtray, and he goes, "Thank fucking God." He goes, "Mimi," he said, "you won't believe the schmucks that come to see me and can't play their way through a 12-bar blues." And he said, "You play really well." And then he said something kind of funny, which of course is a backhand compliment, I guess. He goes, "Why haven't I heard about you? Why are you out here in San Francisco with all the hippies?" He was very, very, very funny. But having his validation, having him say to me, and then he said to me something I'll never forget. He said, "Mimi," he said, "you've got a lot of fire in the belly." He said, "Don't ever lose that." He said, "No one can teach you that." And he said, "And hopefully no one can ever take it away from you." And so when you have someone that you admire so much that is, so supportive, that just makes all the difference in the world. And then he said a few other things that were really helpful. He said to me, "You've got all the technique you're probably ever going to need in your life." He said, "I think you're practicing too much." He said, "And if you want to work on solo guitar stuff and keep deepening your knowledge of harmony," he said, "why don't you listen to string quartets?" And he said, so that was an amazing experience for me, because he basically said, the 2 lower notes are like the cello, the mid-range is like, viola, and then the violin. He's talking about the different, and the different voices you have, the moving voices on the guitar. So that was very profound. But I think, more than anything, and then after that we became friends, and whenever he was in town at Yoshi's, he'd invite me to come to the show, sometimes sit in, which was an honor. And so I think it was just a real morale boost, because like most musicians, I think all of us are very sensitive people, and with that, not always, and particularly for women, not always the most self-confidence. And so I think when you have someone like that really supports you, and Bruce was like that for me too, it really spurs you on and gives you faith in yourself when you don't quite have it yet.
Have you faced any challenges doing what you do, or to continue doing what you do, and how have you overcome them?
That is a great question. And let's see how much longer. We have about another month. Yes, I have. Some of these stories I've talked about in other, articles and interviews. But when I was younger and would go to jam sessions, I was always the only woman, except for maybe a vocalist that would be there, occasionally a female piano player. But it was always me. And, I'd get up there and some of the guys were nice, some were not so nice and kind of disparaging of me, and they'd say, "Well, what do you want to sing, sweetie?" And and that kind of stuff. And so and then there were the years of being out at shows with fellow musicians, and the sort of locker room mentality that I think it gave me a reputation after gigs of leaving skid marks after gigs, but it was really that I wanted to remove myself from that kind of the sexist jokes, the put downs, the disparaging comments about other women players, and so I would sort of remove myself. And this was unfortunate because it also sort of took me out of the loop some of the sphere of getting gigs and being connected. Because I think people misinterpreted that as me as perhaps having a chip on my shoulder when it was just more that I was alone and as a woman, and so I didn't particularly feel like I could confront these guys. Sometimes if I would become friends with some of these men one-on-one, I would talk to them about it, and if they were particularly astute and sensitive, they might go and then talk to the guys and say, this is not really a particularly hospitable, kind of environment. And then gradually more and more women, I started to meet women musicians, and we would go to sessions together, go to jam sessions together and hang out and go to gigs together. So then we were developing kind of a sense of camaraderie. But, I had outright just really nasty things happen. But, I try not to focus on them because I tried to more look back on all of the good things and the people that mentored me. I also had a, incredible junior high music teacher who she was just so supportive. So again, I tried to focus more on those things, but it was certainly difficult. And I like to think that it's getting better for women, certainly at the Jazz Conservatory here in Berkeley, the California Jazz Conservatory that I'm head of the guitar program. We strive for a very inclusive, positive environment for every student. And so I am gratified to see that things changing, not just for the young women, but to see the young men changing too. It's a good thing.